It is a foregone conclusion that everyone in this room, at some point in their life, worries. We are surrounded on a seemingly daily basis by our own personal and communal anxieties. Some of them are trivial. For example, I have some anxiety about whether or not the new Star Wars movie will be good. And I pray to God that Jar Jar Binks will never make an appearance in a Star Wars movie again. You can clap for that one. Of course, many of the things we worry about can be far more anxiety-producing. A few days after the shootings in Paris, Tina, Isaac, and Barrett and I went and saw the new James Bond movie. A couple of days later, Isaac and I were talking about the nervousness we both had being in a public space. We surprised each other by the fact that we had been nervous at all. And yet, at the same time, I remember telling Isaac that I was carefully watching everyone who came into the theater, and that I seemed to be doing this almost unconsciously. The events of Paris, Beirut, the shooting in Colorado and San Bernardino, the ridiculous ideologies of some of our politicians can have a mind-numbing and fear-inducing impact on us, even those of us who work so hard to fight and change those narratives. Others of you, those of you still in junior high and senior high, face a whole range of worries and anxieties every day. Perhaps you feel the pressure of applying for college, or getting good grades, or whether or not you will complete the insane amount of homework you receive every night. I know that's an anxiety for many parents as well. For some of you, it's the deeper question of, what am I going to do with my life? This, of course, does not even begin to take into account the stress and anxiety related to the constant need and desire to feel present and engaged with your friends and all of your social networks, whether they're in person or online, which is, I'd like to point out, a condition that many of us adults struggle with as well. All of this can sometimes feel so overwhelming that it's nearly unbearable. And here enters one of tonight's readings, a reading that on the surface can be frustrating to hear. St. Paul says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known. Don't worry. Have lots of patience. Don't be anxious. Yada, yada, yada." How annoying. But as I stopped to think about Paul's words, I realized, of course, that something deeper was going on. You see, St. Paul was not simply writing a letter to the church at Philippi. He wasn't just sitting around one day saying to himself, I wonder how they're doing. Let me send them a really preachy letter to remind them of how joyful they should be all the time. Rather, he was writing this letter from prison. And not only was he writing this letter from prison, but he was uncertain as to whether or not he would be freed or sentenced to death. And in the midst of being in prison, Paul learns the church at Philippi is struggling. There are both external and internal anxieties pushing down on them. It is in this context that Paul writes these words. and this context in which the church of Philippi receives it. I don't know about you, but my anxieties and worries, especially if I let them take control, do not often lead to gentleness, peace, and patience. In fact, our anxieties and our worries often display themselves in irrational, fearful, oppressive, and even violent ways. As much as I do not understand skateboarding culture, and I do not, and many of our youth know this is true, it seems to me that it is a decidedly adult decision to condemn it and to prevent youth from engaging in it. Now, it is perfectly reasonable to ask young people to be safe while they skateboard. We make people wear seatbelts in cars that we drive 70 miles per hour down the freeway. But sometimes as adults, we let our own fears and worries take over, and we head down often draconian legal paths in the name of what is right and what is safe. Our anxiety, especially when it comes to the youth in our lives, occasionally manifests itself in other more nuanced and subtle ways. I cannot stand the phrase, "the youth are our future." Yes, technically, that is true. But I'd like to remind us that my future and the future of every other adult in this room is not decided or determined either. Just because we are adults does not mean that there is no room for the healthy engagement of youthful novelty and creativity. Every young person here today is a fully present, vital, and engaged member of this parish and community. They lead us so brilliantly in worship. They serve communion on Sunday. And they, like us adults, are learning and engaging their own faith in creative and powerful ways. We need to check the worry of, what if they don't do it right? Or, what if they mess up? Out the window. They will mess up, and so will we. There are even larger ways in which our worries, fears, and anxieties lead to irrationality, oppression, and violence. We now have demagogues calling for the closing of our borders to all Muslims. We have a relentless and seemingly unquenchable addiction to guns. And when many of us begin to simply ask the sane, rational question of what can we do to make this a more tolerant and healthier society, we are derided for being too naive, and in some cases, even accused of being unpatriotic. The level of fear and irrationality has reached such great heights that reasoned conversations are difficult to have. This morning, we lit the joy candle on the Advent wreath. It's the reason that the reading from Philippians was included in all of today's liturgies. Rejoice, says Paul. Or, if I could say it another way, be joyful. But let us understand that the call to be joyful is not some mere call to happiness. The idea being communicated here about joyfulness is so much deeper than what we think of when we hear the word happiness. Joyfulness to me is the deep desire within us that longs to be present and engaged in the world, that longs to be difference makers who meet the barbarism of this world head on, a longing for hope that is so much more. Paul's call to us to be joyful is a call to be present, to become aware of where you are at right now, to find that place of deep ocean rest in the midst of the chaos that surrounds us. It is a call for us to realize that we cannot be joyful when we let fear and hatred infect our thinking, or when we allow worry and anxiety to become the feelings by which we make decisions. As we continue to move through this Advent season and beyond, let us strive to be a people who are present, a people whose gentleness, patience, and commitment to peace is drawn from the deep, joyful well of love and compassion. Amen.